Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bigger 10. I am Steve Deace, and without further ado, let's bring in our co-host, Aaron McIntire, as we begin with the Big Five this week on Bigger 10.
So ESPN has their Football Power Index, and they came out with a preseason edition of that FPI, they call it, and three Big Ten teams are in the top 6 of the Football Power Index. They've got Clemson at number 1, Ohio State number 2, Oklahoma 3, Alabama 4, Penn State at 5, and Wisconsin at 6. Now, Ohio State and Penn State don't really surprise me too much, especially not Ohio State. Clemson being number 1, not a huge surprise there, but Wisconsin at number 6. Steve, what is going on here? Because that immediately, to me, that stands out. I don't know what rationale. I mean, it's funny. ESPN did a huge write-up on this. I mean, it's college football. There's interest in this. They did a huge write-up on their preseason FBI, and I read through that entire thing, and not a single mention of Wisconsin at number 6. That was the main thing that stood out to me. What about you?
Well, you know I follow a lot of these analytics really closely because I want to know which ones I can use in my own sports handicapping, for example, that provide some, I guess we would call it data analysis and support for the picks you want to make. FPI is among the weakest. There's been a couple of seasons since this thing, they really tried starting to push this thing back in 2014. There's been a couple of seasons that it's been really good. Last year would not be one of them. And I would just go to my favorite team, case in point. I mean, they had Michigan number 5 in the country. By FPI's odds, Michigan was the most likely team to make the college football playoff because it had the Wolverines such a prohibitive favorite in the Big Ten. And I mean, Michigan finished the season 9-4. So when I look at FPI, some of their numbers line up with some of the team total talent ratings that we've released here on the show. I've got Ohio State and Penn State, both among 2 of the top 5 rosters in college football. The Oklahoma thing I find fascinating because you're replacing the quarterback there, and the new guy is going to be somebody with no experience at all, former 5-star recruit Spencer Rattler. You're going to lose CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver. You're losing several of the best defensive players the team had. Neville Gallimore, Ken Murray, the linebacker that really helped Oklahoma kind of have a rebound season on the defensive side of the ball. I'm a little perplexed to see them that high. Wisconsin, though. Last offseason, the team that had the biggest chasm, Aaron, between what my analytics that I do for myself, and then I like to check my numbers against other people that do this full time, right? And it doesn't mean if they disagree with me, they're going to change my mind. But I want to know if the reason they disagree with me points to me that I might be wrong. You know what I'm saying? Sure. If I don't like their reasoning, I won't switch my picks. I don't care what letterhead your analytics are with. Sure. I'll stick with my own research, okay? The college football team last offseason had the biggest chasm between my analytics and what everybody else's analytics were saying was Wisconsin. And so when we got down to the end of the year, my analytics were saying this was going to be another 7-5, 8-4 football team. And we got down to the end of the offseason, I decided, you know what? Everybody else can't be right or wrong, and I'm right. Okay, so I bumped Wisconsin up in my analytics that put them in the 9-10 win range instead of 7-8, and that ended up being accurate. Already, I can see this offseason, Wisconsin's going to be the team where my analytics have the most differences again. No, and this time I'm not budging. Jonathan Taylor. Aaron, they let him touch the football over 900 times the last 3 years.
How do you replace that?
I don't know how you and was there like now Wisconsin fans are going to say, well, we've been replacing tailbacks here since Brett Moss the year Aaron was born, and there's some truth to that. But you kind of knew who the next guy was. You kind of got to look at him in limited duty, right? Who's the next guy? You don't know who that is right now. You're going to lose Quintez Cephas, who was their best receiver. They had another receiver that they were really counting on who had a big game for them in the Rose Bowl. He transferred as well. On defense, they're always good on that side of the football. But the top two players that they had on defense, including Zach Bond, those guys are gone to the NFL as well. I'm not budging this year. You got Notre Dame in the non-conference schedule. I think the West Division continues to improve. They play on the road at Michigan in a crossover game. And kind of what we've seen in the Harbaugh era is when Michigan and Wisconsin, I think, have played every year since 2016, and the home team has won every single time. Okay. And the last couple of years, the home team has won convincingly. I mean, Michigan named the score on Wisconsin back in 2018, and Wisconsin turned the favor on us back in September of last year. So when you look at the schedule they're playing and everything else, I don't care what everybody else's analytics say. I'm not bumping Wisconsin up. I don't believe they're the best team in the West, or if they are, they're among the best teams. I don't think this is a 10-win football team again this fall. So this time I'm going to dig in my heels and I'm going to be stubborn for the next 6 months.
Yeah, so, you always say, and I think it's about college football. I mean, football in general, but especially college football, you can't hide
Can't hide your quarterback.
Can't hide your quarterback. Do you think Jack Cohn, which I believe is going to be their starting quarterback going into this year, had a great, fantastic first half of that Big Ten championship game? Just a magical, half of football for Wisconsin. Does he really stand out to you as
a guy that can carry a program?
A top 10 program in the country? No. Let's see. In a game between Wisconsin, neutral site game between Wisconsin and the team they have number 7 right up next to them, Texas, I might give Wisconsin the edge there, not having a whole lot of confidence, I should say, yet in Texas. What about you? I mean,
I would take Texas because I think Sam Ehlinger is a lot better quarterback than Jack Cohn is. Yeah. And I think this is the year that Wisconsin's overall supporting cast isn't good enough to make up that gap. So I would take Texas.
Wisconsin, Texas A&M.
I think that one, A&M returns a lot, but it's not a lot of guys that have, a lot of people think this is the year that Jimbo Fisher's been building towards. That one that's a toss up to me.
Wisconsin, Notre Dame.
I would take Notre Dame.
Wisconsin, Georgia.
I would absolutely take Georgia.
So
in fact, I think Georgia's offense with Jamie Newman, the Wake Forest quarterback, I love Jake Fromm, great young man. But in terms of what today's college football is about, Jamie Newman represents that more than Jake Fromm. Their offense next season, or this coming season now, is going to be better than it was last year, I think.
So here's the deal. So those are all teams I just listed off that are behind Wisconsin in the FPI, and a couple more things on this before we move on that I want to get to. One, we're not saying Wisconsin's going to be terrible this year. I mean, this is coming from an Iowa fan. It drives me nuts how consistent they are. Okay, they're going to be a solid football team, but they're not going to be top 6 good. And I mean, freezing cold takes. Maybe I'll come and eat that later. I don't think that's going to happen. So, but we're not saying that they're going to be terrible or they're going to tank or anything. They're just not the top 6 team. They're not in the top 6 teams in the country. Of course, this is the preseason.
If Wisconsin finishes the regular season ahead of Georgia, and it's for any reason other than Jamie Newman got hurt and missed too many games,
I'll boil this and eat it.
Yeah, I don't see that happening. Nope.
One last thing. You follow these analytics quite a bit, and you noted that the FPI for ESPN is among one of the worst analytics out there. And so when something is consistently bad, it means probably your model is broken somewhere. If something's bad kind of as a one-off, then flukes happen. This is sports. There's humans involved. But when something is consistently bad, like this analytic, where does that usually break down? Do you find out? I think that would be fascinating.
The fundamentals of what criteria you are measuring, and even more importantly, how you're weighting that criteria is a problem. I mean, the year that Les Miles got fired at LSU, they were the number 1 preseason team in the FPI. LSU was preseason number 1 that year, and that's the season that got Les Miles fired at LSU. All right, so that the number one. You want to know the number 1 reason that Michigan was considered the team most likely to make the playoff? Because last year's preseason FPI, I think, had Ohio State 12th or 13th because it didn't adequately measure transfer quarterbacks if they didn't play a lot at their previous school. And so since Justin Fields only played a couple of, mop-up duties behind Jake Fromm and then that ill-fated fake punt against Alabama in the SEC championship game, he didn't really have much of a body of work. And so they had Ohio State. Well, if you think, because here's why that matters. So people want to know how these analytics work. If you're underrating Ohio State at that level, then because Ohio State isn't just playing itself, okay, and that's something that we're going to get into. We're getting into bracketology season, sure, right? So, and this applies with the NCAA tournament as well. People are often looking at teams and saying, I don't think that's an NCAA tournament team, or I don't think that's a college football playoff team, or I don't think that's a New Year's Six bowl team. Remember that these selections are not made in a vacuum. Whether you think such and such team is any good or not, they still have to come up with 38 at-large bids to the NCAA tournament. They're going to have 68 teams in the field. Regardless of how good you think all of these teams are, they still have to play an event. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
Similarly, we're going to have 50 some odd bowl games. So it doesn't really matter. So we're not measuring how good these teams are. We're measuring how good these teams are vis-a-vis one another. We're measuring how worthy they are in comparison to one another. And so if you've got Ohio State ranked, if your algorithm discounts Justin Fields altogether and puts him down, and therefore Ohio State you have ranked 12th, then since that's the only team in your metric whose talent level overall you have considered superior to Michigan, you're gonna then by virtue of how algorithms work, way overrate how good Michigan is because of how much you've way underrated what Ohio State is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And
yep.
so that's the thing too, is that these assessments are never done in a vacuum, but there's a domino effect that happens as a result of what you think about Team A then tells us, because they're forecasting when they put these rankings together, they're forecasting. ESPN FPI is telling you they think Wisconsin's going to finish number 6. All right. So what ESPN FPI is telling you is, because ESPN FPI puts odds on your odds to win these games, and what your mean win projection is determines your ranking here. It's a futuristic model of forecasting. So what ESPN is telling you is that when we get to the final Sunday in December, or the first Sunday in December, the final weekend, and we're sitting around waiting for the final playoff rankings to come out that day, and they always do the teams 5 and 6 and then the final 4.
Sure.
What ESPN is telling you is we're going to see 3 Big Ten teams in that 6 is what and one of them is going to be Wisconsin. That's what they're telling you.
That is not likely, at least not with those 3 Big Ten teams. Let's move on to Big Ten basketball. Steve, I don't know if you've noticed this. It is a freaking unforgiving league, especially this year. Now, yesterday, before Iowa and Michigan State played, there was a 5-way tie for second place. Now, Michigan State obviously beat Iowa. I want to read you this. Entering play yesterday, and this is from Kevin Palga. He's the assistant athletic director at Michigan State. There were about 134 million scenarios for the Big Ten tournament.
Wow.
There were multiple 25-game sequences that existed as of yesterday, before that game last night, that could generate a 10-team tie for first place. Now, usually it's like a 1 in 134 million chance of something like that.
Right.
There are multiple scenarios for a 10-way tie for first place, not to mention a tie for second place, which is what we're talking about now. Now, of course, in March, you're playing in these tournaments. Buys are really important if you can get them in your conference tournament, because you're playing multiple sequences or multiple day sequences of games, and that just takes a wear and tear. And so that all-important double bye that goes to the top 4 seeds, I believe, in the Big Ten. That is going to be the race to look forward to. Then that's not discounting the race for the actual conference crown, because Maryland has a difficult schedule, Michigan State has a difficult schedule, and Penn State has a difficult schedule to close things out here. So what do you think of the way things are shaking out in the Big Ten Conference? Are there any teams that could surprise and move up, like Wisconsin? It's surprising to see them there sitting at the 4 line at this juncture as we're taping this on the 26th. What are your overall thoughts?
I think we're going to learn a lot about just how nuts this is going to get tonight when Minnesota hosts Maryland. And Minnesota is only a 1-point underdog, and Ken Palm only projects Maryland to win the game by 1 point. If Minnesota is 13-13, Aaron, overall, and they're ranked 33rd today at Ken Palm with a 13-13 record. If Minnesota beats Maryland tonight and gives Maryland a 5th loss, and the Terps still have to play Michigan and Michigan State, although they're both at home, but the way, given Michigan State's tradition, do you really believe Michigan State has no chance to go in there and win with cash? No, of course not. I got a Hall of Fame coach and one of the greatest point guards in the history of this conference. The way Michigan's playing right now, I think they got no chance to go in there and win.
No,
I don't think so. I mean, how about, and then in between that, Maryland plays Rutgers on the road. Rutgers has lost 1 game at home all year long. And if Rutgers loses tonight to Penn State, which I think they will, Rutgers is going to be circling that game as, hey man, we haven't made the NCAA tournament since the year Steve Dace graduated from high school, 1991. That's before you were born, bro.
Yeah.
They're going to be thinking, we got to win. We cannot blow this. We have to win. This is the game that cements our bid, right? So if Maryland loses tonight, it's nuts right now. It's absolutely insane. And we said all along it was going to get like this when you looked at the way this league performed in the non-conference. You and I were looking at some of Ken Palm's analytics before we started taping today. What is it? 11 Big Ten teams are in the top 40 in overall defense on Ken Palm. And the only 3 that aren't, Iowa, everybody knows that's not an emphasis at Iowa, and then Northwestern and Nebraska, who are terrible. But then it's not just, Steve, these teams can't score, so that's why everybody plays great defense. Well, 11 of the top 54 teams in offense at Ken Palm are in the Big Ten as well. Okay? So when you're playing when you're playing a quad 1 game a week on average, and most weeks you're playing 2, you're going to have standings that look like that when you throw those analytic numbers together, along with the fact that now these teams are playing each other every single night. So it is already nuts. And these last 2 weeks are going to be insane. That tournament in Indianapolis is just going to be, to quote the great prophet Jim Rome, phenomenal. I mean, that's going to be nuts for 4 days. But if Maryland loses tonight to Minnesota, Aaron, we are in spin the wheel of destiny mode.
Yeah.
Like, who knows how in the Sam Hill this thing, because Maryland has been 2 games up for about 2 weeks now. If they get down to, they've never won the Big Ten, keep that in mind, since they've joined the league. If they get down to a 1-game lead and they still play Tom Izzo, they still play Michigan, they still play on the road at Rutgers, you could see some puckering there.
Puckering for sure. Yeah, the mental game, especially if you dropped one of those. I think at this time of the year, with this sort of competition, it is precarious. If you're in the lead right now and you drop one of those games, it's easy to let 1 loss become 2. And I know that sounds cliche because it is, but there's also 2. I mean, it is just, you've already gone through the gauntlet. You had a 2 or 3 game lead, and then if you drop one of them, I mean, that's really where your mettle gets tested. And just, I would say, I'm just enjoying this.
Yeah.
I'm just enjoying this.
It's fun every night around here.
Yeah, it's fun every night.
Especially when your team's not playing one of those games. You get to watch everybody else go through it. Yeah.
Exactly. I would like to say in the future, I really hope this is a sign of things to come, because usually it's 1 or 2 teams, and there's specific tiers, but there's like 2 tiers, 2 or 3 tiers maybe. There's the Nebraska Northwestern tier, that's the lowest tier. There's the kind of middle tier, that's Indiana through 9 through 12, and then there's the top 7 or 8 teams. And you know what? Those top 7 or 8 teams, it's not inconceivable that any of them could slide up 5 to 7 spots.
Yeah.
And that just makes the entire season enjoyable. And so that's what I'd say to our viewers and listeners. Just freaking enjoy this. Unless you're, chowing down on your fingernails like I was last night watching the Iowa-Michigan State game. Let's get on to your Michigan Wolverines basketball squad. I'm just going to tell you, Steve, from an outside perspective looking in, and I help you produce Michigan podcast, of course, right here on YouTube and other channels as well. But I don't give my input as far as Michigan athletics go. Your basketball program has had an emotional roller coaster over the last year. Now, if I told you this time last year, that you'd be doing well in February in a year, you'd say, yeah, well, that's believable. We do that. If I'd told you everything that's transpired within that year, from John Beilein moving on to Juwan Howard coming back to getting this season started off don't
forget Jordan Poole and Iggy Brazdeikis going pro early.
Going pro, losing those guys, going pro, getting off to a hot start this year before faltering, before going back to getting hot again in February at the right time. It has been a freaking roller coaster. But y'all are doing it again, and it's crazy. And I'll let you take over from here. It's crazy. It seems like, and tell me if I'm wrong, Isaiah Livers, the difference one guy can make just from how your opponents play you. That, it seems like, is the biggest difference.
I don't think there's any question. He's one of the 10 best players in our league. I think he's the best wing in our league. I would have said a couple of weeks ago, him or Joe Wieskamp, but Wieskamp's not been playing well the last couple of weeks. So I think right now, Isaiah Livers is the best wing in our league. The defensive flexibility he provides, I mean, he couldn't guard a point guard one-on-one if you cleared out and ran a 1-4 set. He couldn't do that. But from a team defensive perspective, if the point guard gets a blow by, he is quick enough to help defense on that guy and cut him off. He can do that with maybe all 5 positions on the floor from a defensive perspective. And if you look at Michigan's defensive profile, especially in the games that since he's come back, a month ago Michigan was the worst defensive team in the Big Ten. And right now, they're number 17 in KenPom in defensive efficiency.
That's incredible.
It's an incredible climb. A month ago, Michigan was in 12th place in the Big Ten. Right now, they were number 12 in KenPom. Today, they're up to number 10. It's been you mentioned the ride. Bart Torvik kind of does a poor man's version of KenPom, but he just does it for free. And one of the things that he likes to measure is he's more into the future forecasting model with his analytics. In November, he had Michigan the number 1 team in the country. And in February, he had Michigan the number 1 team in the country. In January, he had Michigan not even in the NCAA tournament. That gives you an idea of what the up and down has been. And, you look at Juwan replacing the best basketball coach Michigan has ever had. And he's had no head coaching experience at all, loses his top 3 scorers. He was able to bring in Franz Wagner, Mo Wagner's little brother, who was considered the top junior Euro last year. And so he was going to play a big role replacing Iggy and Poole. But remember, he broke his wrist and missed a lot of camp. And so this is a true freshman that missed a lot of the off-season conditioning because he was playing in the World Juniors, so he wasn't at Michigan's strength and conditioning program. Then he breaks his wrist. He had really no off-season, didn't even get to school till September, had no off-season at all. The Isaiah Livers missing 11 games, Xavier Simpson getting suspended. When you look at all the issues Michigan's had to overcome and then how strong this league is, and you look at the non-conference schedule Michigan played, they played Oregon in the non-conference, Gonzaga in the non-conference, Creighton in the non-conference. It's a phenomenal first year for Juwan Howard. And if you look at the recruits that he has coming in, I was just for fun, and we'll do more of this when we get into the offseason, but I was kind of just taking a way, way too early look at who I think is going on Big Ten rosters for next year, and then the recruits coming in. And I think right now, if I'm right that a guy like Luka Garza will probably come back to school, I think Iowa and Michigan easily have the 2 best rosters in the Big Ten for next season. But a lot can change between now and then. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, and I also agree with you regarding Luka Garza. We'll get to more of that later. And just to give you a little bit more for our viewers and listeners who come here specifically for Bigger Ten, don't really follow Michigan necessarily that much. Here's what's happened in the month of February for Michigan. Beat a hot Rutgers team. Beat Michigan State for the first time in how many tries? They've lost 4 in a row to them.
Yeah. Let's see. You go on the road to Rutgers and knock them off at their only home loss at their own crib for the first time this year.
And the other Rutgers game was at Madison Square Garden, which was essentially another Rutgers home game.
Exactly. Yeah. And you beat Purdue at Purdue for the first time in 6 years.
6 years. Hadn't won there since a buzzer beater by Glenn Robinson III in 2014. Yep. Michigan only has 6 wins in the last 30 years in West Lafayette.
That's not. That's wow. That's like Iowa at Breslin Center or.
By the way, most teams in the Big Ten, that's their record in West Lafayette the last 30 years. Yeah. Most teams in the Big Ten don't have more than 5 or 6 wins in West Lafayette.
That's not a bad February, to say the least.
No, and gave Indiana one of the worst losses we've ever given them in the history of that rivalry. So no, this has been a good month, no doubt.
Speaking of good things, it's been a good season for Iowa basketball. My expectations for this team were subterranean and to be in the mix even, and to basically, they're going to be in the tournament. At this point of the year, as an Iowa fan, I could not be more ecstatic. But the way they've done it, just with the toughness that exudes from this team mentally, it's so much different than any of the other teams the last few seasons that I've witnessed because of one guy, and that's Luka Garza, in my opinion. However, Fran McCaffery, he needs his props as well. I don't know if he should be coach of the year. But this is definitely one of the better, if not the best job that he's done, moving in the right parts at the right time, it seems like, and shortening, and by necessity, shortening his rotation. Jack Nunge, Jordan Bohannon out with injuries earlier this year. He's had to deal with lingering issues to CJ Frederick.
Yeah.
And throughout all of this, they've been able to keep things going and stay competitive. I mean, going up to East Lansing like they did last night and really hanging tough with the Spartans, that was case in point. But I think the biggest thing about this team, again, is just its mental fortitude. And, that's just something that I've not seen a lot of under Fran McCaffery. And I don't know if it's him. I don't know what the deal is. But it seems like when there's a call that doesn't go their way, they hang their heads, and then it just kind of snowballs from there. But not so this year.
I've been very impressed with what Fran McCaffery has done this year. And I like fiery. I'm fiery. I'm not big into the Vulcan stoicism, but you can't. You have to have some self-control. You just cannot be dialed at 11 all the time, right? And it was getting to the point with Fran McCaffery where you were going to have a frantrum, and you could just feel. And then it was like, is he really upset, or is this tonight's contrivance? To get a call later or something. And you know this better than me as an Iowa fan that watches all of their games. This year, though, the amount of poise his team has played with. Michigan State turned the tables on them last night, but there's at least 3 games Iowa's had this year that they really should have lost. And then at like the last 4 timeout, just turned on the Jets and took blue teams away. I mean, we had you guys beat. We were up by 7 with 7 minutes to go, and ended up losing that game in Iowa City about a month ago by about 8 points. So we were one of the teams you guys did that to. But the amount of poise that Iowa has played with this year, you mentioned, I was just talking about everything that Michigan's had to overcome. Iowa's had to overcome pretty much all of the exact same stuff as well. And then you don't have a Xavier Simpson kind of point guard like we do. Right. So you're still trying to figure it out. Is it that Evelyn kid? Is it Joe Toussaint? Who's the point guard? You going into the year, you weren't sure whether Jordan Bohannon was going to play at all. Then you weren't sure if he was going to take the red shirt, if he was going to shut it down halfway, play the whole season through. When you just look at everything Iowa's had to undergo, and again, put in the context of how strong this league is overall, go back to that opening home game and that blowout loss to DePaul. Doesn't that seem like 10 years ago now?
Yep.
And if I would have told you after that night that Iowa would be ranked in the AP Top 25 heading into the final week and a half of the regular season, most Iowa fans like you probably would have said, no friggin' way, okay? Yep. And yet here they are, especially with all of the things that have gone on there. I think it's a terrific job that Fran McCaffery's done. And you mentioned Luka Garza. As you were talking, I was just doing some math, trying to go through my near photographic memory. And I'd need some more time to research this and think about it. But I think it is possible he is having the most dominant year any Big Ten player has had since Glenn Robinson's final year, his junior year at Purdue back in 1994, which is taking you back a quarter of a century now. All right. And there's been some great players in our league. You think of what Mateen Cleaves did at Michigan State. He had a hell of a supporting cast, and he was more of a facilitator kind of a player. There's been a lot of great players in our league since 1994. I just cannot think of anybody off the top of my head right now. And maybe if I have more time to think about it, I will. But I can't think of anybody off the top of my head right now that has put forth since Big Dog the dominant kind of season that Luka Garza has. And total transformation on him. He's transformed his body. He's transformed his game. Yep. And you know what I love the most about him? He's nasty.
Yep.
He's got a snarl. He's got an edge. He's got some dog in him. All right. And so when he looks like, if he wasn't 6'10", and built like that with the unibrow and everything else. He looks like the kid that is helping you with your math homework in the library, right? Okay. So he may look like the kid helping you with the math homework in the library if you just look him eye to eye. But the rest of that guy, there's nothing white and nerdy about that. He is nasty, and I like it.
I like it too, as an Iowa fan, and it's he was not bad at all, but kind of playing in the shadow of Tyler Cook, you never really got the full Monty of what Garza could do and could be. And you read about some of the off-season training that he does. The dude apparently just does not take a day off at all. It's all protein shakes and down and backs.
And I love the fact his old man is traveling with him and everything else, and that aspect of it. It's a phenomenal watch.
It's a fun story, and guys like Connor McCaffery too. The low amount of turnovers that he's had. That's been
want to talk about a guy now. That was a guy that a year ago, let's face it, we all thought the only reason he's on scholarship is his last name's McCaffery.
Yep.
I mean, he's been the glue.
Yep.
John Rothstein at CBS Sports had some incredible stat. He's had like 6 turnovers in his last 500 minutes or something.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, it's not 500 minutes, but it was a lot.
Yep.
Okay. And he's actually shooting it well. And the other McCaffery, we haven't even mentioned him. I mean,
he was out as well.
That's that's almost a 5-star level recruit.
Yep.
That Iowa was counting on, that is sitting out this year recovering from, building his body back up after beating cancer. Mm-hmm. So when you look at, you've got Jordan Bohannon sitting on a bench, you got Patrick McCaffery sitting on a bench, you got CJ Frederick sitting on a bench.
That's a lot of adversity in an already crazy Big Ten season.
Illinois called because they're known for having their best players in street clothes almost every year. That went on for like 10 years.
Yep.
But when we get these guys next year and they're healthy, they're going to be great. Illinois called and said, hey, we know what that feels like. And so for Iowa to have those guys out and still be having the season that it's having, great job by Fran McCaffery.
Agreed. Let's hit on Mel Tucker's coaching staff here real quick. Let me read you a couple names here. See if you recognize them. Ross Ells.
No, don't know who that is.
William Peglerk. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
I don't know.
Those are the latest additions to Mel Tucker's coaching staff at Michigan State. This is in addition to retaining Ron Burton and Mike Tressel.
Mike Tressel's a good coach. Ron Burton's a good coach too.
Yeah.
But they're holdovers from the D'Antonio era.
Yeah. Chris Kapilovich. That's another guy on the staff. Courtney Hawkins.
I remember him as a kid. He was a great wide receiver at Michigan State back in the day. But he came from the high school ranks, right?
Yep, coaching that same position. Jay Johnson.
That was his OC. That was his OC at Colorado.
Yep. Harlan Bennett, defensive backs coach.
Harlan Barnett, you mean?
Barnett,
yeah,
yes.
He was a great player at Michigan State. He's been with the program for a long time.
And they stole Wisconsin's tight ends coach Ted Gilmore as well. So overall, your thoughts on this coaching staff?
I don't know how, if you're a Michigan State fan, you wouldn't be disappointed, because the university gave him, I think it was the 9th highest rated or 9th most lucrative assistant coach salary pool in all of college football. And you come back with essentially, for the most part, a couple guys from his staff melded with a couple of guys with D'Antonio's staff, and then really a whole bunch of guys you haven't heard of. I don't know how you wouldn't be disappointed with that if you're Michigan State. Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I don't know what the direction that they're attempting to go over there is. I mean, I go back to this over and over, and I will keep going back to this. Why wouldn't you just put your program in a holding pattern for this year or the next, and then you make your move? Attempt to wait for some of this stuff to
and you can do that
over.
because you can't hire an interim coach. That kills you. Okay. But you can do what Minnesota did with Tracy Claeys when Jerry Kill got hurt or got sick. And that is, you give him a 3-year contract you give him Mike Tressel a 3-year contract with a minimal buyout. Okay. So you don't lose anything, and you have some continuity, and you tell him, hey, hit the recruiting trail hard, get out there right now. And if he hits, great. You've found another Ed Orgeron, right? If he doesn't hit, then you're not looking at a massive buyout and everything else, because we've still got the uncertainty of an NCAA investigation and everything else. And I don't know what was so impressive about Mel Tucker's resume that they absolutely had to do this. But, I'm a Michigan fan. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, and that's why they play the games.
I think that'll do it for the Big Five.
When we come back, it's time for the weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather. Stay tuned.
Bigger Ten is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games. So far in basketball, college basketball this year, he's been on fire. That's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. You can get his game day picks, which he posts almost every day now for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
All right, let's play it. It's our weekly game here on Bigger 10 of Would You Rather. Aaron, this first one is for you. Would you rather do radio or television play-by-play?
I think for me, definitely radio. You have a greater job. Most of the time, radio announcing is for a home team. And so you are free to kind of be a fan most of the time. Now, Westwood One, of course, does a lot of NFL games with, kind of neutral announcers. And you can be great on either platform. I just think it's easier to really get into the game when you're on the radio instead of television. So I would definitely go with radio. I'm curious to see what you would think, though.
I would choose radio too, because, man, do you see the way that those radio guys get to dress compared to the TV guys?
It's true.
They get to dress like this.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm in. I'd be in for the radio. Yeah.
All right, this one's for you, and I was sure to make this as convoluted as humanly possible. And I know, especially for our listeners who are relying on me to communicate clearly and concisely, they're really going to appreciate this. But here it goes anyway. Would you rather have 2 road games against bottom half Big Ten teams and 1 game against Maryland to close out the season, or 1 home game and 2 road games against any of the teams tied for second place?
All right, leave that up there so I can read through that really quick. Or 1 home game and 2 road games against any of the teams tied for second place. That's a very difficult question because, I mean, you had the graphic up earlier. Take Nebraska and Northwestern out of the equation, and the rest of those second half teams. I mean, there's some tough road games there. And then the home game is at Maryland, who's the number 1 team in the league. You know what? I'll take the first option. Okay.
Two road games against the bottom half and 1 home game against Maryland.
And here's the reason why. Maryland has been really good under Mark Turgeon. He's kind of gotten a bit of a Jim Harbaugh rap, and that he's actually won a lot there. He just hasn't won anything, if that makes sense. You know, Jim Harbaugh's like won a lot at Michigan, but hasn't won anything. So because he hasn't won anything, people think that he hasn't won a lot. But Turgeon's averaging like 12 Big Ten wins a year. But that's not considered like one of the more intimidating places to go play in the Big Ten. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like when Maryland beats you at home, it's because they've got really good players. It's not because you're walking into the snake pit there at College Park. So I guess I'll take my chances on those grounds with your first option.
That's probably what I would do as well. This one's from you.
Yep. Would you rather have Mark Turgeon, the aforementioned, coaching your basketball team, or Jim Harbaugh coaching your football team? That's why I went to that comparison, because I knew that this was coming. What say you?
Yeah, this is actually more difficult.
I think it's very difficult
than you, because my gut was, Mark Turgeon, because he's closer to winning a title. Well, it's easier. I'm sorry, guys. It's just easier to find good basketball coaches than it is good football coaches. But at the same time, Jim Harbaugh really hasn't shown, even with all the resources of Michigan, that he's any closer to getting to a Big Ten title. Well, he's closer, but he's not any closer to getting over the hump, is what I should say.
I did a video for Wolverine Digest today, and I said we're not any closer to winning a Big Ten title in football at Michigan than we were after Harbaugh's first year. And when he improved us by 5 games, we're pretty much exactly. That team finished number 12 in the country. Last year's team finished 16th or 17th. We're not any closer than we were after his first season. So that, you're right. See, I think Jim Harbaugh as a coach is a better coach than Mark Turgeon, just in terms of X's and O's, game planning, things of that nature. All right. But what would you rather? What do you think is an easier path to winning a Big Ten title? Do you? This is essentially what I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Is it easier to get through a gauntlet Big Ten and win a title that's with a conference as deep as this one's is, or is it easier to have to go and beat Ohio State at the pinnacle of their program? That's really the question, right? That's really the question. Because I mean, if Ohio State was just great, not historically great, as they have been the last 5 years, or really the last 10 years since Urban came in 2011. If Ohio State was just where they were under Jim Tressel, do you think Jim Harbaugh would be 0-5 against Ohio State? I don't think so.
Right.
Now, do I think he'd be like 4-1? No. Might he be 2-3?
But not
Might he be
0-5.
1-4? But he wouldn't be 0-5, right?
So
Okay.
Well, you can continue, but
that's kind of the point that I am making is what's easier in basketball, navigating all of these, top 30 teams every night, or trying to get past Ohio State at its historical apex once a year.
And I actually think it's the Ohio State one, trying to get past them at their pinnacle.
Because you only have to do it one time?
Because you only have to do it one time. Statistically, just from a statistics standpoint, if you start factoring
sooner or later the sun shines on a dog's ass, at least on a one night, right?
Well, exactly.
Now you know where my frustration. You get lucky one time. Just get lucky once.
Yeah. That's got to be awful. I told myself I'd hold off on these for as long as possible, but some of these would you rathers regarding the NCAA tournament starts with this one. Would you rather face a mid-major in the first round of the NCAA tournament or a Power 6 conference team? So
I would rather, I'll just tell you, speaking as a Michigan fan, and we have an incredible record in neutral site games the last few years, I would rather face the Power Conference team, because when we say mid-major, you're talking about, a Creighton, or not, they're not a mid-major anymore, they're not in the Missouri Valley, but a Northern Iowa in the Missouri Valley. Yep. You're talking about a team, like an East Tennessee State, who's like top 30 in KenPom right now. I'd be scared to death of that team saying we make our whole season with a game like this, and my team taking them lightly. Where if we play a Power 6 team, I'm not concerned. Even if I'm playing Tennessee and they're 17-12, the jersey says Tennessee. My kids are going to be ready to play that game. They're not looking past them. That's kind of what you're going with, and I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
All right, good stuff. We'll come back, have our Twitter poll and question of the week next.
Bigger 10 is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, which Big Ten basketball big man do you think is more likely to return for his senior season, Luka Garza or Xavier Tillman? Overwhelmingly, 74.4% of you said Luka Garza. I gave you the option, by the way, of picking both or neither. I thought both would go higher, but Xavier Tillman is married now, has a kid. I could see him, even though I don't think he's as good of a prospect as Garza, I could see him deciding to give it a go for family considerations. But what do you think of those results, Aaron?
So we had this a few weeks ago where I was still not quite sold on Luka Garza as an NBA prospect, and he's still not in like any mock drafts for the NBA.
And let's explain why. If you can't, because it's a global game now, finding guys who can put the ball in the basket, even at his size, who can shoot threes, they're everywhere all over the world now.
Yep.
Okay. If you can't defend your position, you can't play in the NBA. I mean, the level of you've got to be James Harden kind of offensively skilled to justify not being able to play your position, because there's so many good offensive players available that if you can't defend your position, you can't get on the court. And there's a lot of doubt about whether he's got the foot speed to defend at the NBA level. That's why.
Yeah, I am. I mean, he's got, if he makes more strides, he's one of those guys, you never count him out. But Xavier Tillman, for sure, I think at this point is probably going to be the better, and not to say that he's going to be a huge success in the NBA, but at this point, the better prospect for the NBA, and so probably more likely to, or less likely to return for his senior season. But again, never count out Luka Garza. I'm warming up to the possibility of him being an NBA prospect, not this offseason, but maybe next year.
That brings us to this week's question of the week, and it comes from Chris Reed, who says, do you guys think, or how much do you think, Big Ten referees letting the pushing and shoving, grabbing, and the overall hands-on play, how much does that go towards hurting the Big Ten come tournament play? Well, this has been a question and an issue for years and years and years now, and I don't think it really hurts the Big Ten at all. In fact, I kind of think it helps a little bit, in that when the Big Ten gets into postseason play, and particularly in the NCAA tournament, and it's called a little bit tighter, and there's more of a free flowing. This is not a league where. That's why I brought up the offensive and defensive stats earlier, Aaron, because this isn't a league where those defensive stats are great because they don't have bucket fillers. So there's plenty of offensive talent in this league. I think when they get into postseason play and the floor opens up a little bit and the defense isn't quite as clutch and grab, I think it actually helps Big Ten teams.
See, I would have been more inclined to believe that previously, but I just think about it this way. I don't quite agree, because that runs both ways. You're not going to get clutched and grabbed as much, but you're not going to get away with that either, if this is true, if what you're saying is true.
In other words, the defensive numbers then go down a little bit too.
Go down too.
Yeah.
So
I can see that too.
I think it washes out a little bit. Now,
which means we really don't think it has an impact if it washes out then.
Yeah, I don't think it has a huge impact. I think if anything, for more offensive-oriented teams, it helps, because freedom of motion, that's what basketball is supposed to be about. But in the Big Ten, everybody on defense is doing everything they can to get away with as much as they can. So I really don't know how much of an impact this really
and I think it varies team to team too. Like a team like Wisconsin and Rutgers, I think it hurts them in the postseason more than a team like Michigan and Iowa, who right now Ken Palm says are the top two offensive teams in the league. So I think holistically, I don't think it hurts the league, but I do think, given the way a couple of teams play, that I could see it being a detriment to them. So good question. Good show this week. Hopefully the previous weeks were pretty good too. We will be back at it again next week right here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget, like, rate, subscribe, whichever the case may be. Help us spread the word. Back at it again next week right here on Bigger Ten.